All right, folks, I'm in our book on page 347, right at the very top, and before the programming exercises are listed in the chapter, we have review exercises, and I know that most students rarely read through those, but we do have a few that work through them to see if they can hone their problem-solving skills. Now, one thing that we do when we're working with loops is trying to understand what the mechanics are behind them, because once you get the mechanics, you'll figure it out. And frankly, what most people will make the mistake of with a loop is that they'll think usually one number off of what it actually is. And a lot of it has to do with what your loop control variable is, what your sentinel value, and people call it all sorts of different things, the counter, basically, and the logic that determines whether it keeps running. Now, you get the plus plus in front of the variable or plus plus after. In a loop, it's essentially the same. There is a rationale for putting it before or after, and if I remember right, if you place it before, it doesn't persist in memory. It only persists while the loop's running, whereas if it is after, then it persists in memory. So if there's memory considerations, you do the plus plus. There's also some implications upon what it does for output. In this case, it doesn't. The challenge really here is seeing that you have a loop within a loop. So really what's going to happen is you're going to have a loop here, and what you should do first is figure out how many times is this loop going to run. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull up my Notepad++ as my work surface, and I'm just going to look at this and say, well, f is equal to 0 to start with. So is 0 less than 3? Yes. So it's going to do it once, and I'm just putting in a character. It's not necessarily the character that's going to output. All right, and then that 0 will become 1 after the loop goes through. So really it's going to be a 0 the first time through, and then we loop around and we add 1. So the second time through, this is going to be 1 is less than 3, right? So it's going to go through a second time. It becomes 2. So it's going to loop one more time, and then it's done. Because if it's 2, it will run an increment. It will add up to 3. But then when it comes back to run the loop again, it won't run. Because 3 is not less than 3, okay? So, the outer loop, if I ignore this statement, and I was just outputting f, it would output 0, 1, 2. All right. Now, here's where the fun comes in, if you consider it fun. Programmers consider it fun. Think about the fact that this outer loop is going to run 3 times, and then every time that runs, we are going to run the inner for loop. So you see what I already did? I know that the outer one's going to run 3 times, so I separated them on 3 separate lines. So now every time I go through the loop, I have to stop and do the same thing with this loop. Now, this one's going to do the same thing, but notice what the 2 is set to as opposed to 3.
Right.
So how many times is it going through that loop? Twice. Because it's going to go through with a 0. That's true. It's going to go through with a 1. That's true. And those are the only 2 scenarios. So what it's going to do then is it's going to output 0 and then 1, and then 0 and then 1, and then 0 and then 1. So if you put the string together, then you should end up with that, and I don't know if this is one of the answers.
It's not.
It's not. Okay.
That's
And that's what you got? Okay, so it's possible that they have the wrong thing in here. Now, the way to verify it, of course, is to bring up a tool. JGraphs is probably the easiest one to use in this capacity, just because it's so simple. So, well, this is just for grins and giggles, so to speak.
You do that like you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah, after you do it a few thousand times, you catch on. Yeah, I got rid of all my curly brackets. These darn quotations. These ebooks that try to protect themselves are just bad practice. Okay. So I'm trying to organize this here so the layout makes sense. Okay. So that's basically what we have in the book. Now, hopefully, I will prove myself brilliant here and it will work. What am I missing?
I think you have extra quotation.
Right there. Good catch, Nick. Nick is the voice from the internet, by the way, if you guys are wondering. All right, let's go ahead and run it. All right, so, we got to declare them. So in this case, since they're not declared, I have to put a little int there. Let's try running it again. All right, so apparently I was a little off. Apparently the answer is the first one. And what did I come up with an answer?
You came up with 00110120 something.
And I'll tell you why.
Okay, please.
Okay. Here's the why. Because the system out print line, every time the inner loop runs, okay, so here's the answer to it, of course. All right. So remember I had it broken down like this?
Right.
But what I neglected was that the F prints out every time. So this one,
Is always 0?
the F, so in other words, okay, the first time through the outer loop, it's going to print 0. But when we get to the inner loop, it prints the inner loop value and the outer loop value. So it's always going to be 0, 0, 0, 1. See that? So this is going to be 0, 0, 0, 1, and that's going to be 1, 0, should be 1, 1, and then 2, 0, right? No, yeah, that's right. 1, 1, and then 2, 1. That should be the answer. Now, does that look like what they have? Let's find out. Yep. Now, if they had this separated, where they were printing out the F, let's say, in this position, then what I originally printed out would have worked. But because that system print is inside the inner loop, that inner loop's going to print whatever its value is, but it's going to print the outer value loop first. So if we're going through the first time on the outer loop, however many iterations are happening in the inner loop, that 0 is always going to be there. So if there were, if this number was 10, it would print 0 through 9, and then what this would look like here would be 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, all the way up to 9. And then the outer loop would run again, and then it would be 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. See the pattern? And don't be afraid to take this and put it into a piece of software to try to figure out what it's doing. The other thing that you can always do is you can do it like step into and trace through the variables, if that's helpful for you. Now, usually, most of the problems that you're going to see with loops is trying to figure out how many times it's going to run to do the things that you need it to do. And there's certain techniques that you can apply to kind of keep yourself from making mistakes. But this is actually a nice little exercise, and you can see I went boldly into it thinking that it was going to be one thing, and I was very confident of it, and then I'll put it in there, and I'm like, uh-oh, it's not quite right. So you guys shouldn't feel bad that even I'm looking at it and I'm not hitting it right away. But then I looked at the code and I'm like, oh, okay, they're doing the output statement inside the inner loop. So the inner loop is always going to print the outer loop's value before it prints its own value. Okay? All right, so hopefully that lent a little clarity, and that's my brief little video on for loops.